All right, listeners, your cousin's back at it. If you didn't have a chance to listen to the Three Musketeers episode with Matt earlier this week, you should listen to that. The Dark Godfather, Uncle Peter Zeihan, is coming. That episode will come out in the next week or two. I'm going to keep you on pins and needles. I won't tell you exactly when it's happening. Keep refreshing that feed. Keep on pinging us annoyingly on social media about where our episodes are. There's lots of content coming. Other than that, cousin, I haven't even told you this. I'm down here at the Gulf of America doing field research into who took a knife to the Gulf of America and cut a chasm into this beautiful Gulf of America that Donald Trump has claimed for the United States. What are you doing right now with your time?
So for those of you who can't see me, this is Shaggy Marko. I'm in between states, in between houses, in between hairdressers, and therefore I look very shaggy. This is we have a Cousins After Dark. We have various iterations of this podcast. This is the Shaggy cousin Marko. So I am in between moves, and so it's a very busy time in my life. Obviously, writing research for clients, talking to clients, speaking to colleagues doesn't stop, so you're still traveling, and I don't think my hair has ever been quite as like blown out. I look like Slobodan Milosevic in his prime with his giant hair. That's like a deep reference there to 1990s geopolitics.
It's all good. I don't think you laughed enough at on my reflecting pool joke. Is it just me? I cannot get enough reflecting pool content. I just keep on I want to know what the next saga is in the reflecting pool content. It's just it's truly wonderful to me.
As somebody who has built pools and had to, I feel sad for our president. It's hard. It's hard building the right pool. So the man just wanted a pool, and it's being vandalized. It's you gotta look. Donald Trump has 99 problems.
It's being vandalized. Yep, it's being vandalized. It's that must be what's going on here.
He cheapened on the contractors. You know that was gonna happen.
Yeah, it's all fun and jokes until you realize that people have actually been arrested for this, and they are cordoning off the reflecting pool now, and you can get arrested if you take pictures of it. I'm reading I forget what the name of it is. I'm reading David Remnick's book about the fall of the Soviet Union, the last day or the last years, months, whatever it was before the fall of the Soviet Union. And it's, following Gorbachev and his internal battles with the Chinese Communist Party, and he's trying to reform, and the communists are back at them. And I thought in reading the book that I would find echoes of what's happening in the United States right now. And you can't actually, because even the Soviets at the very end, they're very serious. They're debating Marxist philosophy with conservative and progressive factions, and what is historical memory, and who controls truth, and who controls narrative, and doing this with, very long, well-written articles in Pravda and these other propaganda sources. Whereas we're cutting holes in pools, man. We're doing UFC fights on the White House lawn. The White House lawn destroyed now. Anyway, I don't have to go down this route. I just I was expecting there to be overtones, and there's not. There's a beautiful American stupidity and simplicity to what we're going through right now.
Well, I think that's always been a strength of America, though. It's kind of naive literalness, in a way. So UFC fights on the lawn of the White House are both, clearly a sign of cultural decline, but also it's what America always was. And that's why it can harness that brutality for good or for evil. But I want to say one thing there, since Please. We're going into this kind of qualitative soft, that's how we're opening this podcast. I do want to say that there's something else going on at the same time. So the other thing that's going on is that we're witnessing the best World Cup ever. And nobody, yes. And so we had a World Cup episode with, my colleagues from BCA Research, Juan Correa and Robert Timper. They wrote the World Cup forecast. And one of the things that they talked about was this expansion to 48 teams that was largely panned. It was seen like a really bad idea. So it turned out amazing. Nobody's complaining about it. You've got countries like Curacao coming out and kicking ass, taking names. Cape Verde was not a pushover. In fact, poor Sweden ended up being a pushover, which I certainly didn't expect. So like the expansion wasn't a problem, but the other thing that wasn't a problem was there was this hesitation about America, about Donald Trump, about immigration, about visiting America, spending money in America, expensive tickets, all this stuff. And what's happened is you've got the best world-class stadiums on the planet, including, I must say, in Mexico. Like some of the Guadalajara stadium that our good friend, cousin Bayless went to was just, I mean, it is an absolute architectural marvel. The Azteca last night in a game between Mexico, who did they destroy? Just my brain just stopped, but it was incredible. Like the stadiums.
It was the Czechs, wasn't it? Was it the Czechs or was it the South Koreans? I was watching it too.
No, South Koreans. South Korea shockingly lost to South Africa. So you're right. Mexico versus Czech Republic.
Right.
Uninspired play from the Czechs. But the point is, the stadiums are full, and YouTube is filled with this very cute videos of Europeans and people from Latin America coming to America and just being like, I've had nothing but great people welcoming me. I've witnessed the miracle that is Buc-ees, and I'm both equally disgusted and amazed. I both think it's absolutely idiotic and amazing at the same time. And you're just, you have all these incredible YouTube videos of all these people from around the world coming to the US and just being, like pleasantly surprised. So I guess what I'm saying is there's this really interesting juxtaposition. On one hand, you have 250-year anniversary of America, and there's definitely a TDS narrative out there that like this is the end. Like Donald Trump has achieved idiocracy. His cabinet is full of like basically people who are unqualified. We've got debates over fucking pool installations and ballrooms and UFC fights. What is this? On the other hand, the country is like infrastructure is actually not that bad. People are getting to various parts of America easily, and it's a continent, let's not forget. The stadiums are marvels of architecture. They're just like $30 billion cathedrals to sports that people can choose to host these incredible games.
Mm-hmm.
And tickets are two grand. Whatever. Let's go, baby. Yellow. Let's go. I mean, like stadiums are full. So I think just like all of that put together is just really interesting. And it's such a, and what I find very interesting, Jacob, is nobody wants to talk about the fact the World Cup is great. If you hate Trump, it's difficult because on some level it's like saying that foreigners want to come to this country even though the country is being run by some sort of neo-fascist. So the Trump haters, even though they're probably demographically pro-soccer, they can't really enjoy it. I'm talking about the Americans, of course. And then there's the MAGA camp that just hates soccer for ideological, cultural, idiotic, anti-globalist reasons. And so it's funny because I feel like the entire world is absolutely reveling in this World Cup, except the host nation that's splintered to these two camps. One camp doesn't want to give America any credit for just being an awesome fucking country. And the other side just hates soccer and is like, we shouldn't even be hosting this. And there's too many foreigners enjoying this game. Should we call ice?
I think this is our best thing that we do, where we begin with something that is soft and we actually, like, it actually leads to a deep and insightful point. And I want to steal from your phraseology, double click on it a little bit. Because, well, first of all, like I stopped at a Buc-ees on the way here to the beach. I'm in Santa Rosa Beach, off the Gulf of America right now. First of all, Buc-ees, it was like Night of the Living Buc-ees. It was like all the worst parts of America with the tourists running around. Like I'm not exaggerating. It took me 15 minutes just to get out of the parking lot because that's how crowded this place was. Like even my 3-year-old was like, let's get out of here. She wasn't asking for the candy. She just wanted to get the heck out of this Buc-ees. It was absolutely terrible. But it's a deeper point actually. And it like makes me think of, Tocqueville and democracy in America, because I think you're right. At the very, very top echelons of U.S. society, you have the Trumpers who are like, oh, UFC, blah, 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 like this is the real America. And then you have, I don't know if you saw the interview with Larry David, like where somebody asked Larry David about the UFC fight, and he was like, oh, this is just terrible. This is like the deteriorate. And like, that felt a little bit like too, like, okay, like, you created Seinfeld and Curb. You think that like they're going to be building monuments to that in terms of cultural sophistication? Like what are we talking about, Larry? It's pretty good.
Well
Anyway,
put.
sorry.
Well
Well,
put.
yeah, but like I think the thing about America, and this goes back to that point about the Soviet Union that I was trying to make, which is like we're not a top-down nation. Like there are these two top-down competing narratives, one from the liberal intelligentsia, one from the MAGA Trump camp, and most of Americans are not experiencing that. I think most Americans are actually like, oh, cool, soccer's on. And look, there are these random, like, weird foreigners who are coming to Buc-ees. Like, let's hang out with them. Like, let's be nice to them. Did you see the statistics about how in Boston, like, the Scottish have drank 3 times more beer than any other month in, like, the history of Boston selling beer? I don't know if that statistic is exactly
Or
right.
Lawrence,
Like, they're literally
or
running
Lawrence,
out of beer
Kansas?
because the Scots. Yeah.
Or this
Just
place
incredible.
in Kansas that adopted Algeria, you know, like 10 years ago, I bet you 40% of people in that town were like, ISIS is coming to cut off my great aunt's head. And now they're like embracing a country from North Africa and their soccer team that came and set up camp in their small town. And I thought that like they're like, again, not to be driven by algorithms, you know, YouTube knows I'm clearly a foreign-born globalist who enjoys these stories of cross-cultural pollination. But like YouTube is brainwashing me, and the brainwashing message is everyone's loving it. You know, like the Americans are loving it, foreigners are loving it, and it's just like an incredibly successful World Cup, showing that
and
the median American
and it just goes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is happy, and I just like I think it goes to the most profound and powerful part of American propaganda is that it's not intentional. Like the best American propaganda has never been the actual propaganda. Like that's the stuff that MAGA is making, or that's the stuff that the liberal media is producing right now. The best propaganda for America is just let people be as free as they possibly can and go to Buc-ees and do weird shit. And the Germans and the French and everybody's coming to America,
yes,
and they're at Buc-ees and they're like,
yes,
oh my God, I can do this. I can do whatever I want. And so we're like, we're not going to rehabilitate all the crazy shit that's happened in the last couple of months, but that core of the United States, which is like free people running around going to Buc-ees, it's fine. It's good. It's doing great. So
one of my favorite clips is this British guy losing his shit because he's driving a Wagoneer. You know, so Jeep Wagoneer, if people don't know, it's an American like 7-seater. It's one of these like, it's like GMC Yukon or whatever is Jeep's version of that. And the man is just like, this is what? Yeah, he's just like slowly, he's getting a brain aneurysm because he's behind the wheel of this incredible, enormous car driving on a highway that's perfect, you know, in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of nowhere. He's clearly like driving between Dallas and like Kansas. You know what I mean? And like, I've done that drive. And he's like, oh my God, why is this road so perfect? Buc-ees. So my 17-year-old daughter, who grew up most of her life in Montreal and Santa Monica, so like clearly just like I've bred a globalist like, like child. And she is in love with Buc-ees. You know, and I was like, how do you even know Buc-ees? You know, well, Instagram. So we were in Texas. She walked into one, loved it. I want to shout out to Buc-ees because you just destroyed our opportunity to be sponsored by them. Thanks, Jacob. But best bathrooms in the world. You walk in there and it's just like, oh, you know, the urinal has like, oh. So, and I'm like, wait, what? But why? And I think the answer to why is because of what you just said. It's like the true expression of why the fuck not. That's America. So when some Italian, like there's this cute YouTube of these Italians in Buc-ees, and they're like, look, this was a small drink, you know? Now, on one hand, they know that's wrong, and it leads to diabetes. Like, the Italians know that's ridiculous. They would never actually indulge in this on a day-to-day, but why the fuck not? You know, and that's what America is, and you're absolutely right. The best propaganda of America is why the fuck not? You come, hey, if you want it, you can have it. That's America. It's freedom, you know? And it's interesting. Anyways, I always hate it.
And it's a thing that Donald Trump cannot destroy, just to get serious for a second. And it's the thing that Joe Biden can't destroy, and it's the thing that AOC can't destroy, and it's the thing that, I don't want to say the words never, it's the thing that China will never have. It is a thing that American competitors have never had. Like, this is the thing. And yes, we are like stripping down institutions and like doing all sorts of things that like, you know, keep me up at night. But like, you know, as long as Americans are going to Buc-ees, like, I think we're okay. Like, I'm feeling optimistic today, you know?
As long, it's interesting. If anybody does destroy it, I think it would be more the left than the right. And I'm saying this purely objectively and, you know, non-biased. I just think that, I think the left has a little bit more of that kind of like top down. Like, well, maybe you shouldn't drink a 40-gallon of Coke. Like, you know, maybe that's not good for you. So I will tell you not to do it. You know, so there's a little bit of that kind of plastic straw nanny state approach to it. But I think Americans share this with a lot of other countries in the world, and a lot of other people in the world, particularly in the West. It's like, when you take away my plastic straw, like, that's when I rebel. You know, that's when you push too far. And so you're right. I think it's going to be very difficult to lose this in America. And this is something we touched on, I think, with Matt. It's also that is what defines, you know, the war between Persia and the Greek city-states. That's like the distinction. That's what the West has in its very core. Not to sound like some Western civilization kind of right-wing nut, but it's kind of true. It's like it's bred into people in the West to rebel when that freedom is taken away from them. And not to say that Europeans don't have freedom. I think too many Americans use the word freedom like, well, we have freedom. Belgians have freedom. Okay? Like, Belgium is free, for fuck's sakes. Like, you know, like, I hate when Americans are like, we're free here. Well, they're free everywhere. However, there's different types of constraints. And I think in Europe, the constraint is more cultural. It's not legal. It's not like you can't build a Buc-ees in Italy. It's just that, you know, like, it will be frowned upon. And I think what these Europeans in these cute videos on YouTube, they're really, we should throw some in the show notes because they're so fun to watch. What I think the freedom in America is freedom to be kind of gluttonous, freedom to be yourself, freedom to walk into a nice restaurant in sweatpants, for fuck's sakes. Like, yeah, I'm wearing athleisure into a 3 Michelin star restaurant. Fuck you. Yeah, I didn't put a collared shirt on. So what? Like, that is not legally enforced freedom. That's not something that's constitutional. It's a mentality. Right? You see what I mean? And that's what I think they were celebrating.
It's freedom. It's freedom also to have air conditioning and to turn the thermostat down to 65 when I go to sleep every night. And meanwhile, France is in a heat wave and they don't have it because they're still up their butts about air conditioning, and maybe they should turn it around. I will say, cousin, like, there is a flip side of this. Like, I woke up this morning at 5:30 to get my workout in and everything else, and I went down to put some umbrellas at the beach, and I was like, it's 5:30. I'm gonna get there first. I'm gonna get in the front of the line. I'm gonna put these umbrellas right next to the water. And I'm there at 5:45. I'm like, you know, doing the things into the sand. And this lifeguard guy comes up to me and says, hey, sorry, this is all private beach. These are all reserved for the company that puts the umbrellas here. You have to put it back behind the thing. And I'm like looking around and I'm like, okay, like, I don't, like, private beach, like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm here. And he's like, well, yeah, I can't put my umbrellas out here for another hour because we have to be safe for the sea turtles. But like, my guys are coming out here, and if you put your stuff here, I'm going to have to ask you to move it. So why don't you just move it back? And in my head, I did not say this because I didn't feel like having an altercation at 5:45 in the morning. But I was like, great. So we don't wear fucking masks in Florida around a pandemic, and you can do whatever you want at Buc-ees. But I can't get here at 5:30 in the morning at this beach, this God-made beach on the Gulf of America, and put an umbrella here. I need to send a letter to the president because this is ridiculous. I should be able to put my umbrella here. Anyway, I really went off there. Okay, let's turn the plane a little bit because I'm speaking of propaganda. You know who's been really good at propaganda the last week, cousin? Volodymyr Zelensky. He is crushing it right now. And Ukraine is crushing Russia, or at least that is the message that I'm getting. So I wanted to start off not with Iran, not with China. I wanted to start off with them because, I mean, just a smattering of what's happened in the last week or two. You've got them hitting refineries in Moscow, and it turns out that big meme-like explosion was a Russian missile, missed a Ukrainian drone and hit the refinery, and the top blew off the refinery, everything else. They're doing long-range strikes on refineries all the way in Siberia, which are more geared towards exports. They're hitting semiconductor construction plants and things that are critical there. Zelensky threatened Belarus and said, if you don't turn off the radar that the Russians are using to target Ukrainian cities, we're going to come hit you. And then at least Zelensky came out, yesterday, we're recording June 25th. Zelensky came out yesterday and said the Belarusians turned it off. They listen because they don't want to mess around with us. And he's out there with videos every single day being like, hey, you want to do this? We'll do this, Vladimir. Like, when you're ready for a dignified peace and to talk about it, that's fine. We're going to keep doing this. And then last but not least, I'm sure you've seen the pictures and videos out of Crimea. I mean, the Ukrainians have slowly been cutting off every single land access point to Crimea, and there's only, I think there's one left or a couple left. You've got people streaming out of Crimea trying to get out. You've got reports of fuel shortages. You've got the Russians, claiming they're going to be able to defend it, but are they even going to be able to get supplies in? You've also got the Russians, bringing air defense closer into Moscow, into populated regions. You're talking about rationing fuel supplies.
That's what caught my eye.
I don't know if you saw Sechin. Yeah, Igor Sechin came out and said Rosneft is not going to be exporting here in the imminent future because we have to supply the U.S. The Russian domestic market. Like, all of that is there. So take it whatever direction you want.
No. What caught my eye was definitely Crimea. People are without fuel now in Crimea. But the other one was the Zelensky claim. I mean, this is from Zelensky himself, but his claim is that they're going to have to defend Moscow and St. Petersburg. That they're moving some of their air defense assets, which does make sense because S-400s are maybe the world's most sophisticated anti-air defense system. That's what the Russians have, but Russia is an enormous country. So it's easy to defend the United Arab Emirates with one, THAAD or one Patriot, but you can't really do that with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they don't have thousands of these. So they are, according to Zelensky, moving to protect effectively the core of Russia, leaving most of its energy producing regions and refineries completely indefensible. And this is where this drone technology, quite frankly, is I know that when we already talked about that, and we're going to talk about that again when you released the podcast we did with Uncle Peter, but this is a serious problem for Russia because it's a vast country. They've never experienced, they never planned, they never they did not plan to fight a war with somebody next door where that somebody can effectively just drive a truck to Siberia and then release thousands of drones. That's not what they expected. And so, yeah, I mean, they're completely vulnerable. So you're right to start with this because I think it's important to note two things. Once, President Trump actually said some positive things about Zelensky. I don't know if you saw that. I think it was today.
I did see that. It stopped me in my tracks. Yeah. It was. Apparently they were having a conversation. Trump was sitting in a chair, and it was a very unflattering picture of Trump. He's never looked fatter / like he was wearing a diaper more than he's sitting down with Zelensky at this meeting. But sorry, yes, go ahead.
No, I mean, it was just great because it also shows Trump is clearly non-ideological. He didn't like Zelensky for whatever reason. He's this guy is sucking up our resources. He wants America to fight his war. Now that Zelensky's winning, and quite frankly, not really using American technology anymore. Not the days when javelins saved Ukraine, that was long time ago. This is now, Ukraine now possesses technology that America, quite frankly, needs. I mean, not just America, get in fucking line. Everybody needs Ukrainian technology. So now, Trump is yeah, he's a winner now. You're doing well. And then what was really interesting was Putin's comment, which was sad, pathetic, borderline just whiny. Putin, the strong, big-chested, there's a man who works out at 5:30 in the morning and says no to somebody trying to move his umbrella. Let me tell you that. That's the image of Vladimir Putin. That's the image of Vladimir Putin, and he takes the beach, impales the guard with the umbrella. So he came out and said, well, what about the Alaska understanding? He said America is not, the comment, I forgot what the exact comment was, but President Putin said something like, America is not abiding by the understandings that we came together in Alaska. And then Rubio comes out today, the Secretary of State of the United States of America and National Security, and says, what understanding? And it was the most, oh shit, you're on your own. Oh, I'm sorry, Ukrainians are beating you with child's toys, with consumer electronic drones. Yeah, sucks to be you, bro. So I think
and let me just quote like Zelensky, you just gave Putin's response. Zelensky's response, I even think I texted this to you. What was it exactly? He said, hold on, I want to get the exact the exact comment that he said because it was so good. If Ukraine burns, then your Moscow will burn as well. Like Putin's out here talking about Alaska understanding, and Zelensky's literally like, I'm gonna burn Moscow. Like, are you ready? It's just incredible. Anyway.
It is incredible, and I think it just shows real weakness, and I think that's a problem. That's a problem because Russia, if Russia was like a self-contained, almost like anthropomorphic entity. You know, if you think of Russia, if you think countries as entities that have their own thoughts, like Russia doesn't suffer leaders who whine about fucking understandings. You know, that is not what Russia respects or expects of its leaders. So, I mean, you and I are a broken clock. You and I have been saying that Putin is doomed since February 21st or 22nd, 2022, right? Like, this is, just to be clear, we've been saying this since he invaded Ukraine. But I have to like caveat what I'm about to say because of that. It's been 4 years that we've been basically wrong, but I don't think we've been wrong. It's just been a slow decline. I don't see how he survives as a leader of this country, or as an effective leader, at least. I mean, maybe he will continue to be the leader, but when you start begging America for like, hey, guys, didn't we get to some sort of a agreement in Alaska? Remember that? And Rubio is like, nah, no. And then Trump is like, Zelensky's awesome. I like the cut of his jib. You know, The wheels are turning in Russia. And one thing I would say is, like, you and I should play a bingo here, because what Russia does in these situations is, to prevent domestic revolt, it usually finds a way to pivot out of the uncomfortable situation it's in. So famously, when Ukrainians kicked their ass the first time in 2015, oh yes, that's why the Azov battalion is such a thorn in Russian side. It's not just their, somewhat neo-Nazi links. It's also the fact that the Azov battalion basically stopped Russian-backed rebels in 2015. Russia got its ass kicked. It didn't want to take it all the way. And so it pivoted to fighting Islamic jihadis in Syria. So my question right now would be like, where does Russia pivot? Can it pivot? And there's some candidates out there. The election in Armenia, the situation in Armenia is very interesting, very concerning. There's still some Russian troops in Armenia. Putin is talking about how Armenia's got to choose between EU and Russia and so on. Could Putin find something easier in Central Asia, outside of Europe, so that he can pivot the attention of the public away from what is an absolute disaster in Ukraine? The problem is, it's not up to him, and that's your point. The problem for Putin is that Zelensky is now like foaming at the mouth. He has a technology that allows him to continue to push. And if Zelensky feels that he can roll back territorial gains of Russians in Ukraine, like, this goes south very quickly.
Well, it's not even about that. And like, yes, you and I were both very negative about Putin's future immediately after the invasion. You were more strident. You talked about he's got 12 months. I wasn't willing to go there. I was willing to say, no, like, long term, he has set himself up for failure. But I wasn't quite expecting this. And when you get to when you get to Zelensky's counteroffensive, it almost looks like Ukraine is faltering. Like, Russia bet that its greater numbers and its capacity for suffering and its war complex was going to be able to win the day. And what has happened, like, I don't think we can put too fine a point on it. It's a literal technological military revolution in the last 6 months, the way that Zelensky and the Ukrainians are using drones to strike against Russia. And it's not that they're going to roll back Russian territorial gains in eastern Ukraine. They're not. What Zelensky is doing now is he's bringing the war to the doorstep of well-to-do Russians in Moscow and St. Petersburg. So I think the Russians could have ignored the Ukrainian war for years. It doesn't really affect them in the same way that the Strait of Hormuz doesn't really affect Americans. Sure, higher gas prices, whatever. But fundamentally, we're all still at Buc-ees. Like, we don't actually care. But that's not true now if you're a Muscovite. That's not true now if you're in St. Petersburg or if you're vacationing in Crimea and these other things. And I just want to throw out a couple. I mean, I think you and I were going back and forth with somebody on X about the disappearance of the governor of Russia's central bank. She reappeared a couple of days ago after 3 weeks. She had a cold, was her explanation for that. And of course, immediately she cut interest rates, which all of that was pretty weird. But when you start looking underneath the hood of the Russian economy, I mean, cousin, I know that they can outsuffer people, but things are looking really bad. The National Wealth Fund, when they invaded, it was 7% of GDP. It's down to 1.8%. Their projection for what their total budget deficit was going to be for this year, they exceeded it in Q1. So they have already spent more on the deficit in just Q1 than they thought they were going to spend for the entire year. Corporate debt is up like triple. Their oil and gas revenue, these stats are only as of May, but down 45% year on year. So ironically,
despite the increase in oil prices.
And the increase wasn't that big, right? The fact that the Strait of Hormuz did not lead to Mad Max and canisters and everything else like that is that Vladimir Putin, you think he's sitting there, he's going to be who's the guy? A Morton Joe? He's waiting to be a Morton Joe. And it's like, actually, like, we're going to go over here. Like, there's a tanker over here and, there's some oil here. Like, we're good, Morton. Like, we don't need to do it. And so you just start picking at all, you've got high interest rates, you've got inflation that is picking up. Now you're going to start talking about fuel shortages. The only thing that was giving them foreign currency was the energy export. Now Sechin is out there saying Rosneft's not even going to be able to export because we have to provide for the Russian domestic market. This is all Zelensky saying, I am going to bring pain to everyday Russians. And if he can bring pain to everyday Russians and put them in the street, then Putin is in trouble. Now, the flip side of this, and I don't know if you saw this too, I've been following this, Michael Kaufman, who's probably the best analyst of the Russian military of like the last 5-7 years. I think he's been right about just about everything. He had a big article in Foreign Affairs where he was, it was published, I think, just a couple of days ago. And he was talking about how, like, the type of threat that Russia is going to be in 5 years. And I was like, that's cute. I'm not even sure that Russia's going to be around in 5 years, but there is like some argument that if Russia reaches an end to this war and then takes all the drone technology and takes all the lessons and reconstitutes a military force, maybe in 5 years, it's sort of bad. But the other part of this is, there are two things that Putin has not resorted to. He has not resorted to mass mobilization, and he has not resorted to tactical nukes. And if you're wrong, like if there is no place for him to pivot, and that's what I would say, he's not going to pivot to Armenia. It's not about distracting from Ukraine. Now it's about distracting your well-to-do Muscovite that I can't get fuel. Like, they don't give a shit about Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan or Armenia. They want fuel.
Yeah,
like, they need fuel in their actual house because these things aren't going to do.
That is the difference.
And
that's different from 2015. In 2015, it was easier to distract because there was nothing was happening on the streets of Moscow. So you're correct about that. Yeah.
And just, the last data point here, I don't know if you saw this, they're also talking about taking funds from pensions and plugging them into the military, plugging into the government to plug the government deficit. Like, can you imagine, like, the U.S. government just saying, oh, your 401ks, those are ours now because we need to bomb
imagine. That happened.
The Ukrainians.
That happened in my homeland. That is exactly what Slobodan Milosevic ended up doing in order to fight various wars in Bosnia and Croatia. So this is a playbook that does happen in Eastern Europe, but it's also playbook.
That's what Putin is doing today. Like, what happened to Milosevic after he did this? Like, Russia's doing it today. Like, it's crazy.
No, exactly. Exactly. That's why I stand by my view that Russia has a terrible track record of offense. This is just a fact, and I think it's kind of funny that everybody thought that the Russian economy was doing much better than people had forecast. This is just people who misunderstood that when you fight a war, there's like a surge in economic activity because you're fighting a war. But the longer that goes on, like, wars are not good for your economy. They're not. They're like short-term sugar rush. And what happens when they end is a very, very quick but severe recession. This is just math. It's when fiscal thrust goes up because you're spending a lot on war, the fiscal thrust comes down. It gets very negative. And like even America, after a very brief conflict in Korea, had a recession. It was a fiscal cliff recession. So this will happen to Russia. It's potentially already happening to it. And so, there's going to be a lot of very angry people. To me, this is a long-term problem. I don't think Russia gets anything out of this. The drone technology point that you're making, look, it's 2026. Everyone now has drones. Everyone will have drones. The Ukrainians are going to make a lot of money selling this technology, but this is like 1914, and we all realize that machine guns are a big deal. You can no longer have a cavalry charge. By 1918, we all know this. We already all have machine guns. It's not drone technology is not that sophisticated. It just isn't. Ukrainians are very good at it, but that technology will absolutely be disseminated across the world. The impediment to adopting drone technology is actually more policy and regulatory. Like what I fear for America is that our procurement process in the Defense Department is like, I don't want to use the word corrupt, but like if some upstart,
please, are you kidding?
Yeah, and it's not a Donald Trump thing, by the way. It's always been like that. You have very few incumbents that have basically.
It's not always been that way. This is Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex in the 50s, and he was right. And it's gotten worse and worse since then. Like that's the beginning.
But just to be clear, the reason it's gotten worse is because there's been too much M&A activity. So you've gone from like over 100 contractors to 4. And so there's an oligopoly. And so my only concern about America in terms of like, can America adopt this new technology? The whole point of this new drone technology, and we saw it with Iran and their Shahad drones and Ukraine, is that they're cheap. And so my only concern is like, will American defense contractors be okay producing something that I can own as an individual, like a $5,000 drone? Because they're not. They like building stuff that is, $20 million and up. So that's the problem with America. But I will just say, like, other than that, adopting drone technology is not that difficult. Russia will not have an advantage over anyone after this, other than tactical nukes. And your other point about, mobilization. I mean, this is one of the things that I've been telling clients since December of 2022, when the first and the last mobilization. My point was always like, look, the number of people that Putin, Freudian slip, number of people that Putin mobilizes, that is your indication of how committed Russians are to this conflict. Also, it's your indication of how serious they are about this conflict. Is this a real national security threat? Is it existential? The answer to all those questions is no. This is absolutely a war that Putin has engaged in, a war of choice. People listening to this who bought all those bullshit narratives that Russia needs Ukraine or Ukraine's a threat or NATO expansion is the reason, blah, 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 will explain to me why they haven't mobilized in 4 fucking years. Because it doesn't really matter. Like, they don't need Ukraine for anything. This was completely a war of choice. It was a war of domestic politics. Putin was suffering in the polls. He tried to distract the public. He invaded Ukraine. He only mobilized once because the median Russian just does not in any way feel threatened by Ukraine. There is no threat from Ukraine, zero, or at least there wasn't until now, And
it wasn't until now.
So, and that's all you need to know, that Putin has not been able to mobilize the people because there's an implied fear that if he does that one more time, just one more time, if he tries to mobilize the public, there will be riots. I mean, for God's sakes, Americans mobilized more for Vietnam than Russians have mobilized for Ukraine. Like, that's crazy. Vietnam is far away and clearly was never existential. And yet Americans in the 1970s willingly went and walked into their death in fucking Vietnam relative to Russians in Ukraine, where they have to go to prisons, they got to go to North Koreans, they got to like pay people bonuses to go to war. Like, we had a draft in the United States of America for years, and it tore the country apart. I mean, to, Putin's credit, he doesn't want that. But my point is just that anybody who tries to sell the narrative that this war in Ukraine is somehow important to Russia and Russians, it isn't. It never was. And that's why this is such a huge problem for Putin, because it was a war of choice. It was supposed to be a short excursion, a special military operation. It's 4 years, hundreds of thousands of people are killed, and the gains are, we got some like drab-looking beaches in Crimea as a reward for all this, which, by the way, we already had in 2014 and 15.
Already had.
We could have held on to those gains. So we actually got nothing for this, like an extra of Donbas. Great. Like, we got some extra coal. Yay.
My only point about the technology is that if Ukraine can do this to Russia, theoretically Russia can do this to Ukraine. Now, the war of choice, it was supposed to be a war of conquest. One of the ways you get you step aside some of the economic problems of wars. You win the war, and then you take all the resources of the person that you conquer. They don't get to do that with Ukraine. They've tried, they've looted and stolen lots of resources from eastern Ukraine, but they're not going to be able to, metabolize those portions of Ukraine that they were going to conquer. But I don't like if Putin can claw on for another 3 to 5 years, and if he can say, you know what, all that money I spent on modernizing the Russian military, it obviously all went to corruption, but I want a force that 5 years from now can do to Kyiv exactly what they're doing to Moscow right now, and I want to be able to do it to Warsaw and all these other cities too. Like I see, and this takes us to a different, a difficult place, right? And yes, go ahead, please.
But Jacob, that's where I really have to pump the brakes. My favorite statement, but like
pump the brakes, do it.
Putin already has that capability. So drones, that's the funny thing about drones. People are making this thing like drones are amazing. First and foremost, Russia has something better than drones. It's called a hypersonic cruise missile. Russia has something better than drones. It's called, bombers that can fly over Ukraine and drop bombs on your fucking head. So Putin already has 10x what Ukraine has. The issue is about asymmetry of pain tolerance and asymmetry of technology and cost, just like in Iran. Like, let's not pretend like Shahad's drone is better than any technology America has. America owns Iran. America destroyed Iran's air force in a fucking day. America sunk its navy in a fucking day. USA fucking A. However, America has zero pain tolerance, whereas Iran is fighting for supposedly its existence. Similarly, Ukraine is fighting for the war is in Ukraine. And that's the power of drones. The power of drones is not that it is actually a superior technology. It fucking isn't. I mean, there's some ways it is. They're difficult to catch on radar. They go slow. They can loiter. There's some ways that they add capabilities. But the truth is that it allows the meek who are under attack, who have a high pain tolerance, who are already being subjected to extremely alien-like technology, destroying their cities, it allows them to fight back against a country they did not expect to have to deal with gasoline shortages because Ukraine flew some drones into their territory, or like the United States of America, although I would say that in this case, this was idiotic that America didn't expect Iran to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. But, that was like, it's America that already has all the technology to impose pain on Iran. It's Russia that already has all the technology it needs to impose pain on Ukraine or any of its neighbors. It's the neighbors now have the ability to do the same to Russia. And so I don't think that acquiring drones really changes Russian capabilities that much. I mean, they still have hypersonic cruise missiles that can hit Warsaw. How is it better if they have some drones? I actually don't think it is. It doesn't actually, they don't gain anything. If they end up attacking Europe, they already have quite a bit of sophisticated capabilities. It's actually the opposite. Drones are something that allows the weaker country to impose pain on the stronger country, because the stronger country has been spending a lot of resources on countering hypersonic cruise missiles by nuclear powers. Russia wasn't sitting there trying to build an air defense system that is impenetrable to drones. It's actually impossible for them because they are such a huge country with huge territory. Like, they're just going to be vulnerable to this forever. Until some technology maybe is created where, I don't know, you can deal with this. But the point is, that's why I'm not too worried about Russians learning drone warfare. It's like, meh, it's great.
I mean, maybe it's not about the technology. Maybe it's more a question of doctrine, because if Russia has the drone capability and can also add to it the hypersonics and everything else like that, like, yes, you can't conquer Kyiv, but you could certainly bring Kyiv to a standstill. And whatever you want to say about
But they already did that.
Well,
they already did that.
They haven't, though. Like, life in Ukraine continues. Like, they have not been able to impose costs
no, but Jacob,
on Ukraine.
That's not a technology. They absolutely have. The difference is that Ukrainians are used to 8 out of 10 pain. They're used to the slide of 0 to 10 being around 7, 8, or 9, because they've been fighting for their lives and for their country. And Russians have been able to impose that level of pain without a single drone. They don't need it. Russians have gotten lazy and they've gotten comfortable. Their experience of this war is a 1 out of 10. And drones allow that pain to go to 5 out of 10. But that's too high for that country. That's where drones come in. It's like the reason you say Ukrainians have not been like stopped. They've continued to live. Yeah, but that's because their pain tolerance is so much higher. Same with Iran. Like the United States of America does not need a Shahad drone. That'd be ridiculous. Like why? We've got Tomahawks. Like fuck yeah, you know? So like the United States of America does not need this technology. It already imposes like wanton destruction on Iran. However, fine, but Iranians are ready for it and they're willing to incur that pain. It's Americans that are not willing to incur $4 gasoline, so a Shahad drone hitting a tanker is a big deal. And that's what I mean about drone technology. It's in the hands of the extremely powerful. It doesn't add much to their arsenal. And again, I understand there's certain things drones do well that we should, respect, and America should certainly complement its arsenal with drone technology. But America already has vessels and military technology with which to deliver incredibly powerful payloads that drones will never deliver. It's that they themselves are vulnerable. The powerful are vulnerable. And that's where I don't think Russians take anything away from this conflict. I mean, you know what? One thing they will take from this is they will be the most sophisticated country in the world at countering drones. I think that's...
Well, yeah, I mean, all the American VC is going, like, counter drone technology is now the buzzword. Like there's going to be gluttony when it comes to like the oligopoly spending on how to counter drones. That's for sure.
For sure. And I think close combat. One other thing I would just say, like, we talk a lot about drones that, travel distances and hit boats or refineries. The one thing I will say the Russians clearly are the best in the world at. This is where the fiber optic cable tethered drones come in. They're really good at using drones in combat. That I will concede to you. Like that will be a big deal. But again, I think this is something that people will just learn, from the Ukrainians and maybe from the Russians. So
yeah, I'm going to stretch the military metaphor a little bit, but if you go back to 1948, when all the Arab armies invaded the nascent state of Israel, I mean, Israel on paper shouldn't have survived. It had a much smaller force, and you had all of these different Arab armies that were converging on it that were far more numerous in terms of manpower. And the way the Israelis survived, if those Arab armies had all been on the same page and could have struck at the exact same time, maybe Israel would not have survived, but they couldn't. They were different Arab armies and they weren't in good communication. So one would hit and the Israelis would punch them in the nose with their forces. And because the Israelis had basically no supply lines because their country was so small, they would move their elite forces to the next line, punch them in the nose there, and then move back and forth. Whereas these Arab armies were not coordinated at all, and they had these really, really long supply lines that took forever to update. And so Israel, with the very, very short internal lines of supply, was able to move things. It doesn't quite map onto the drones, but it does give you that sense of why Russia is struggling so much, because it is trying for a war of conquest in Ukraine. And since day one of this operation, the Ukrainians have been hitting Russian supply lines. They just cannot, exert themselves over these long distances. And so I think you could see Russia playing more of well, maybe not. Like maybe if Russia plays a spoiler role, like what if Russian drones start hitting Finland and Sweden and punishing these other countries for joining NATO?
But again,
probably at that point, the Finns are like, we're ready, baby. Like we could do this. Like if you want to, like you want to go there. So I take your point.
I would say that it would be silly because Russia has hypersonic cruise missiles with which it can already do that. Having drones does not meaningfully increase their, like in a qualitative way, it doesn't really increase their capabilities. Would Russia maybe get some plausible deniability? Be able to say, we don't know whose drones those are. I mean, but that's kind of stupid. Like, why do it then? You see what I mean? Like, I just don't think that...
Yeah.
By the way, one thing I would say...
Did you see the report that... Yeah, please go.
Yeah, just King Farouk sent like 20,000 dudes into Israel in 1948. And I think there's like this narrative about that war in 1947, 1948, that like Israel did something extraordinary. I would see it differently. I think that it's very similar to every other conflict that we've been kind of watching. Vietnam survived against the greatest military on the planet. Ukraine beat Russia. And part of the reason is that a lot of times these countries that are on offense, just they're lackluster. First of all, Egypt, I think, had a population of 20 million in 1948. I mean, fact check me. But it was much bigger than Israel. And it sent 20,000 troops. That tells you everything you need to know, Jacob. Everything you fucking need to know. When people say Arab armies tried to push Israel into the sea, but did they really? Like, did they? 20,000 dudes walking across the Sinai to fight the Israelis. That sounds to me like King Farouk was like, checking a box and didn't really give a fuck. The truth is it was a lackluster effort without much planning, PR exercise, and the Israelis kicked their ass, God bless them, because they were fighting for their country. And I think that's what is almost always the fact. I think that Russia walked into that buzzsaw. One mobilization in December tells you everything you need to know. If you're out there listening to this and you got sympathies for Russia or you are Russian, listen, it's simple. You want to conquer Ukraine? Let's fucking go. You're a country of 130 million people. Mobilize 10 million people and fucking do it. Oh, you don't want to. It's put up or shut up time, and the answer is they shut up. They've been shutting up for 4 years. It's game over, and now the Ukrainians have something in which to impose pain. The truth is, the drones that we're talking about that are hitting Moscow and St. Petersburg pale in comparison to what Russia has done to Ukraine. They pale in technological, in pain. They're a fucking joke compared to what Russia has done to Kiev, Odessa. They're a joke. It's laughable. And yet that laughable amount of technological capability is making Russians reconsider this war. That tells you everything you need to know. This war was never about existential risks to Russia. It was a war of choice, and they lost. Just like America did in Iran, just like it did in Vietnam, just like it did in Afghanistan. The Taliban were living in caves before Americans put them back in the caves, and they were cool with that. And so they won. So like this is the story of civilization. If you walk into somebody else's country, you better bring it.
I don't know if you also saw that there's a Dutch company that apparently agreed to produce 700 cruise missiles for the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians are just using shitty drones now. They will not be using shitty drones forever. So like Zelensky's threats are, he's writing checks that maybe he's going to have the ability to cash. On the Middle East war thing, I mean, I hear you about Egypt. I mean, Israel had its biggest challenge from the British-trained Jordanian troops, and there's a reason that Syria looms large in the Israeli psyche because that was the greatest vector of threat there. But if Egypt had been able to coordinate what it sent with the Syrians and with the Jordanians, like now you're talking about Israel now they're going to have to start dividing forces and choosing and picking and choosing,
for sure.
Where their best forces are and their ordnance.
But everybody could have done more. I would argue everybody could have done more on the Arab side, even the Jordanians and the Syrians.
For sure.
It was just it was a typical kind of like, hey, let's we're gonna walk over these like Jews. It'll be easy, and then it's like, fuck no.
Well, and the reason I bring it up is just because the Russians had the same problem, and they had this problem in Georgia in 2008. It's just nobody noticed because Georgia was Georgia. But the Russians thought they had fixed this problem. They can't get their Air Force and their army on the same communication. And not only that, the Ukrainians were listening in the whole time. And so they were just hitting them with drones. So just like when we say that the United States, for example, is like this extremely powerful military force, yes, it can blow things up, and yes, it has lots of shiny things. You know what the United States does really well, better than everybody else? Logistics. They know how to actually communicate with different branches, and everybody's on the same page, and everybody's part of the same pincer maneuver, and the fuel shows up at the exact moment that it's supposed to show up on the front line. That is the part of war that makes you really good at it. And the Ukrainians are showing the capacity to do things like that. Russians, and Russia is showing no capacity to learn these things, So
I think there's also a level of just I don't want to say like racial, but like I think there's a level of like discrimination, just they're like hubris, like we're just better than them.
Okay.
And that was the case with Arabs versus the nation state of Israel. Like these guys have showed up from Europe. These, like what? Oh, we're gonna lose to these guys. They fucking kicked your ass. Same with Americans and Vietnamese. And then Russians and Ukrainians. There's just this sense that like we're a superior nation that knows how to fight a war. With Arabs and Jews, it was interesting because like the Jewish armies and troops in Israel who came from all over the place, including domestically trained, obviously, some were obviously local and had some experience, but you got to understand the Arab countries around there had fought the war like recently in World War I. There was this sense of superiority of British trading, fighting against Turks, liberating themselves against the Ottoman Empire. There was a sense that like, well, we fought wars and these guys just showed up from Poland, like good fucking luck with that. Oops, got their asses kicked. Same with Americans in Vietnam, and then same with Russians in Ukraine. Like it's just and I don't think it's something wrong with Americans, Arabs, and Russians. That's not what it is. Is again, it comes down to not technology, not some inherent racism towards your enemy. It just comes down to countries that fight an offensive conflict against a country or people who are defending themselves just inherently are always going to be at a disadvantage, because when you're protecting your homeland.
What was the last? I mean, I guess you could count Azerbaijan versus Armenia in Nagorno-Karabakh, although that's a really, really small territory. What's the last successful war of conquest in the world where one country conquered another? Like it's like an offensive military action that was wildly successful. And resulted in conquest. I don't mean like Gulf War, like 1.0, where you bombed a bunch of, Iraqis in the desert who had no anti-aircraft stuff. I mean, like, no, you wanted to break the will of another country and you conquered them and then you integrated
them.
Like, what's the last?
No, I think Gulf War is probably a good one. I mean, the United States of America toppled the regime in Iraq. I mean, let's not deal with the subsequent chaos. I think America, like conquering Iraq and removing like just its leadership, I think that's a good one. I think you can use, I guess Crimea, but it's, you're struggling to find really like tangible ones that echo in time. I mean, you got to go back to World War II. The stuff that Germany did to its neighbors was true conquest, absolute blitzkrieg. That's a good
Japan, I guess, also,
Yeah,
but
I mean, you got to go back
hold
there.
it, so it doesn't really. Really count.
Maybe like we could have a debate that lasts an hour. Maybe if Hitler didn't attack Russia, like there's all sorts of things. If he had just made peace at that point, I don't know. But I think it is difficult. This is why, for those of you who play board games, and I've said this on this podcast before, when you play Risk, and you're the attacker, you have 3 dice. Your defender, you have 2. But if you tie, the defender takes and wins. Why? Why did they do this when they created the board game Risk? Like if I roll 3 6s and you roll 2 6s as a defender, I lose 2 of my attackers. I don't conquer you. Mm-hmm. But I just rolled 3 6s, bro. Like, come on. Why am I losing? Because of that, defense has an advantage. Defense has an advantage. And I wouldn't just say because of supply lines, which was your point with Israelis fighting against Arab nations. That's a supply line argument. I think it's also motivational. It's about pain thresholds. It's like Al Pacino says in Any Given Sunday. In football, like in life, it's the guy who's willing to die that's going to win. And
I mean, the Israeli army is also a really good example of why doctrine and esprit de corps matters. I'm forgetting the exact I think this was in 48 but it was in Israeli military handbooks. It might still be there. I don't know. I haven't checked in some time. But there was a story about a unit that was cut off, and some number of soldiers needed to stay behind to cover the retreat. And basically without blinking, the leaders of the unit said, all leaders up to the front to cover the retreat. Everybody else get the hell out of here. And so there was this idea in Israeli doctrine in particular, where it's no, like you lead by example. You are the tip of the spear, and that also it forces you to be aggressive. Like you need to go take the lead. You will go first, and others will follow you. Which is not the doctrine that they were fighting against. The doctrine that they were fighting against was, let me figure out what I need to do, and let's send the peons up to the front, and then I'm going to start pushing pins all around like it's 19th century, like aristocratic warfare. It was one of the things that was exceptional about their doctrine. So yes, like if you have and it goes back to your point, the psychology of war is if you're willing to take risk and push to the front, like you can create outsized gains. This is also the story of Robert E. Lee and the Confederacy. And it worked for him until it didn't, because he ran into a buzzsaw that was just willing to, play the meat grinder game and wait for the smaller force to eventually run out of energy. And it eventually did, after creating a lot of, problems for the North. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's esprit de corps wins in everything. I mean, I would say that it wins in sports. It wins in corporate culture. This is why culture is so important, by the way. Like what we're really talking about, culture is not like your proclivity
What we're really
to
talking about is Buc-ees, guys. We're talking about, do you really want to come up the Gulf of America and try and conquer these Buc-ees? Like, good luck to China. You're going to come
look,
up and
no.
hold these Buc-ees? No, you're not. You're not
Well,
holding
but it's
Buc-ees. Good luck.
but culture, like sometimes we think of culture as static. That's why I like the term esprit de corps more, because esprit de corps like shifts. It shifts in time, it shifts with teammates, it shifts with moments. And that's why when you're trying to build a corporate team, or you're trying to build an offensive army, or you're trying to defend a country, or you're trying to, whatever it is, you got to make sure that the esprit de corps is there. The messaging is there. There's no people who want to lead from behind. So to your point about this Israeli doctrine, imagine if some major is like, well, actually, I'm going to get the fuck out of here. So you got to have the buy-in. You got to have the right people. You got to have the right rituals, the right sense of identity, the right sense of who the enemy is, the right sense of what the North Star is. All of these things really matter. And in my experience, I've coached at a youth level. I almost became a professional coach. I think I've said that on this podcast before. I'm obsessed with sports. Obviously, I've worked, like in corporate America, whatever, corporate Canada. The point is, I can attest to my life experience has not changed my view of this. Esprit de corps is all that matters, and that's where rituals are so important. That's where understanding what you're fighting for is really important. Just understanding what it is. And that's where the smaller defender nation always has just an easier way by default. The reason the risk creators gave defenders that advantage in dice rolls is because it's just much easier to create a narrative of what you're fighting for. You're fighting for your homeland. You're fighting not to become Russian. You're fighting to be Vietnamese and not have some Americans come in and tell you, who's going to run your country. Like, that's just easier to do. And that's why the drone technology is additive to those people doing that. It's not additive to offensive, strong countries that already have ability to burn down your house. But it's the country that's in the attack that assumes its house is not going to burn. Its gasoline prices are not going to go to $4, and that's where drones are such an additive tool to somebody who already has a high pain tolerance against somebody who doesn't. I think that's what's fascinating, and that's why, if I was Xi Jinping, if I was any leader of any large country in the world, I would reconsider any offensive campaigns for at least the time being.
Which again makes what Azerbaijan did in Nagorno-Karabakh all the more impressive, which makes what Israel is doing in Lebanon all the more impressive, which makes what Turkey has done in Syria and portions of northern Iraq impressive. Like, you poke around, it's funny, the military campaigns is a little strong, but the military developments that we don't talk about the most are probably the successful ones, because they're not the ones that are creating all of this news flow. So they are out there.
Just to pat myself a little bit on the back, but I did write a report on Armenia, Azerbaijan when it happened, which is weird because I only write for people who have a lot of AUM and nobody invests in either of those two countries. But in 2020, I did notice one of the things about that conflict that's interesting is that Azerbaijan actually did adopt. It was maybe the first use of frontline drone technology. Obviously Americans were droning, individuals for a long time and using them as surveillance. But it was the first conflict, Azerbaijan versus Armenia, where drones were, with you on the front line. You were using them to attack Armenian tanks and Armenian mechanized forces. And so it was interesting because that's maybe a bad example, because in that particular case, the defender didn't just have the access to the technology. Armenians were just very behind. And that's a testament to Azerbaijan losing the war in the 1990s. And just waiting 20 years to rebuild their economy, amass natural resource wealth, buy the latest technology, and then attack a country. And by the way, I've always said that that's the future for Ukraine. The reason I'm not worried about Ukrainian territories being lost, and I speak to, Ukrainians, Russians, everything, and I tell them this view. I say, if Zelensky asked me, Marko, what would you do? I would say, take the deal. Freeze the border. You're going to win. In 20 years from now, you will be a more advanced economy than Russia. I would bet anything on that. Anything on that. You're going to be integrated into the Western world. You're going to get the benefits of, access to Europe and America and Middle East. And in 20 years, you're going to be so much more technologically superior to Russia that these oblasts you've lost are either going to join you because they're going to be like, fuck this, or you're just going to walk into it like hot knife through butter. Like, that's my view. So like I would do the Azerbaijan strategy, which is, oh, cool, you've got Nagorno-Karabakh? Sure. I'm just going to wait, 20 years. And in those 20 years, the trajectory of Russia, I don't think is going to be pretty. And in those 20 years, I think trajectory of Ukraine will be what South Korea did in the 70s and 80s. I think Ukraine is probably the next great miracle, economic miracle, And, I don't need them to be bombing Moscow for that. That's just clear. It's a garrison state. It's going to have access to markets, capital. It's going to have access to technology, just like other garrison states of the West, whether it's Israel, whether it's South Korea, whether it's West Germany. These are all countries that became tip of the spear for the West against some enemy. They became darlings. They became preferential treatment targets, and they punched above their weight quite significantly. So when you think about all the what's happened to South Korea, all the developments, this country is now an incredible economy, and yet it's still in a state of war with its northern neighbor. It never resolved that conflict. It's just frozen, and it hasn't impeded it to become the economic miracle it is today. And by the way, the counter to this almost always, Jacob, is corruption. The counter is, but Ukraine's corrupt. And to which I would counter, South Korea is incredibly corrupt. Its corporate culture is terrible. Look at, just Google Samsung family and all sorts of stuff that's been happening. It hasn't been pretty.
Or just watch Squid Game.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's not like South Korea resolved this. It just did what the rest of us do. It became corrupt with lawyers, which is like an advanced form of corruption, and God bless them for it. I'm not criticizing South Korea. It's an incredible country that punches massive above its weight, but it's kind of like the culture of corruption hasn't impeded the country. I do think it's corporate valuations, and some of my clients who do bottom-up stock analysis of Korea, they will tell you there is a persistent, well, not anymore because of the AI nonsense, but before there was always kind of a persistent discount in South Korea because of this opaqueness of its corporate relationships. Anyways, I just want to say that hasn't impeded Korea of becoming an incredible country with incredible technology, incredible exports. So I think Ukraine, that's the path of Ukraine. And so they should, they should thank Putin for that. Obviously, I say that as a glib joke. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. That's a tragedy. But the fact of the matter is, Vladimir Putin said in February of 2022, there is no Ukraine. And there are some polls and some data and some statistics that he could use to prove that he was objectively correct about that. Well, buddy, if there wasn't one in February of 2022, there is one now, and you're one of its founding fathers. So slow clap for Vladimir Putin. Well done. Well done. One of the biggest own goals in history.
Yeah, from one of the greatest practitioners of geopolitics of the last 30 years.
Yeah, proving that probably, it's not an old man's game.
It really isn't. All right, we'll leave it there, listeners, and we'll talk to you soon. Cheers.